Hello, thank you for joining me today. I'm Jan Clothier of Thinking Stamping, and I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator based in New Zealand. And today I'll be sharing with you how I made this card for the latest inspiration hop at Around the World on Wednesday. Now we're coming up to the end of the catalogue, and one of my favourite bundles, which is sadly retiring, is this Cottage Rose one. And so since our theme was flowers with a twist of a technique, I've made this card with some partial die cutting and a lovely transparent front so that when it sits it looks like the flowers are just floating into space. So it's a little bit tricky in places, but if you just follow step by step it goes along pretty easily really. If you see anything that I use today and you'd like to add it to your craft stash, you're more than welcome to shop with me. There's a link to my online store in the video description below and through the social media end card. Of course, you do need to live in New Zealand to shop with me. So we'll start off with the things that we need to make it. The Cottage Rose bundle, of course, is retiring shortly. So if you see this and you love it, and it really is a lovable bundle, then order it very quickly because it will probably sell out before the end of April, which is the cutoff for the annual catalogue. Okay, so obviously the Cottage Rose bundle is something that you need for this set. I'll show you all of the paper requirements and then I'll show you what you need for them. So we need to have 2 pieces of thick white cardstock, and they need to be cut the size of a card base. So for me that is 10.5 centimetres by 14.8. But if you're not a metrics person, if you're an imperial person, then make these pieces whatever your standard size card base is. And I used thick white to give it a little bit more heft. You need to have 2 pieces of just basic white cardstock. One of them is for the inside of the card, so it's cut 0.5 centimetre smaller, so it's 10 centimetres by 14.3. And then this piece of basic white is almost the same size as the card front, so I've cut it just 1 millimetre or 2 shorter because it's going to be my back, so that would make it something like 10.3 by maybe 14.5. Okay, the exact measurements are less important for that one, but it just needs to be just slightly smaller than your backing piece. You also need another piece of white just for stamping on, so it doesn't really matter what size it is, but big enough to get a stamp and a die cut out of. You need another little piece of white, which I'll explain what that's for as we go, but it is the width of your card front, so for me 10.5 centimetres and slightly under 4.5 centimetres that way. And a little piece of granny apple green. Now I'll show you what all of those different bits do. Oh, and the other piece, of course, which is quite important, is we need a piece of window sheet to make the card front with. Now, I've made it 10.5 centimetres, probably quite hard to see on video, but it's 10.5 centimetres, and I've just made it longer than my card front. How long? It doesn't really matter, but if my card front was 14.8, I just added on enough, like I've made it about 22, and then I have scored it at the 14.8, which is the height of my card base. Now, it's even though it's scored, it is reasonably difficult to get it flat, so you need to get your bone folder in there and give it a really good score, because if that doesn't fold nicely, your card won't sit nicely. So you see how I've given it a good solid fold. I'm just going to pop that to the side for a moment or two. Now this little piece of granny apple green, he's quite easy. What we're going to do with him is we're going to get the cottage flowers dies. We're going to take this sweet little leaf and we're going to die cut 2 of those. Remember I said we needed a piece to do some stamping on, and that is exactly so. We are going to just stamp, and I've already done it, the large spray here, because what I've done here is I have layered up. You see it side on? I've layered on a rose out of that. So I needed a piece that was big enough to to stamp it, and as you can see I've already coloured it in, because the two things which are most important in this video, not the colouring, it's the partial die cutting and the putting together of the card. So I've already done the colouring for that, and in a moment I'll go away and fussy cut it. And what I'm going to do with the other piece of that paper is I'm going to take this die which matches that stamp, and I'm going to cut myself out a spare piece, just a white die cut of that. Now my piece of basic white, which was 14.3, oh sorry, 10 by 14.3, that is my inside piece. So I've already used that stamp and I've just stamped it in Tuxedo Black. You could colour it if you wanted to, you could colour it to match, but I didn't want it to compete with my, you know, like I kind of view this as the star of the show. So I wanted that to complement and not compete. But if you wanted to, there's no reason why you couldn't colour that one in as well. That is to do with the backing. Now, the two pieces of thick basic white that we had. One of them is for the back of the card here. So you do have to be a little bit careful with window sheet because it does pick up fingerprints, and it especially picks up glue. So how you do the adhering is really up to you. You can use tape or you can use glue. They've both got their fors and againsts. I'm going to be brave and I'm going to attempt gluing mine, so I'm going to put some glue. You do want to make sure you don't get ooze though if you glue, so you know, make sure it's spread out and don't use too much. And then I'm going to feed it in there. So you see now I've got a standy up, albeit not very strong, but I've got a standy up base. And I'm going to crease that again because I really want that to stand firm. And then the piece of paper that I said was just basic white cardstock, cut ever so much slightly less than my base. See, I'm going to attach that on the back, and that's going to do two things. It's going to cover up any messiness, and it's just going to give that back a little bit more strength. So I'm going to glue that on now. And in case you've forgotten the dimensions, whatever your card base is, so for me, which was 10.5 by 14.8, I've cut this just a couple of millimetres less. So if you're working in imperial, just, I don't know, a 1/16 of an inch, an 1/8 of an inch, something just a little bit less. And I've cut it less so that it doesn't hang over the front and make a mess. Okay, so that's what it is, and I'm just going to leave that to dry while I work on the front. Now, one of the other things that you had, I asked you for, was a piece of thick basic white 10.5, 14.8, and you can see what I've done with it. I've taken that lovely stamp and I've stamped it in the position where I want it to be on my card front. And I've already coloured it in, and I've already added the sentiment. See, my sample is Feel Better Soon. For this one, I've done Best Wishes, but you know, you can pick whatever. And you can see that I've made a little mark there. Now that mark is at 4.5 centimetres from the bottom, and that becomes quite critical when you are doing the die cutting. So I'm going to attempt to show you how to do the die cutting now. The important thing is in the setting up of it. So here's my base plate, and I'm putting it on. Got to get my die, obviously, wherever I popped it. Yep, here. So I've got to put my die on, and I've got to get that lined up nicely. Okay. And then when I run it through the die cutting machine, what I have to do is I have to look at those marks, which is where I want the cut to stop. And when I put it through, I need to make sure I put the plates in line with there, because when it goes through the die cutting machine, as soon as it gets to this point, it will stop cutting. Where it runs out of plate, it will stop cutting. So let's see if I can just pop that into practice. I'm not sure how this is going to show up on the video, but I guess we shall find out shortly. Okay, so is it still lined up? Yes, it is. Are the plates lined up? Yes, they are. Okay, through we go. Clunk. Okay, let's move all that stuff that we don't need out of the way. And so you can see what's happened is I've now got that going on. So I then just get my paper trimmer and I line up my little 4.5 centimetre pencil marks there. And then I very carefully cut to there, to where the die cut starts. And then I turn it round and I do the same thing on this side. I line it up and I just cut as far as the die. And now, bingo! I've got my lovely little front done. Now, you might ask why I've already coloured that one in when I've told you that I'm going to layer it up, and that's because whenever I layer up, I always colour the underneath, just so that when people are looking underneath, they don't just see white. I don't know, it's just me. And it also gives me a better idea of how it's going to look when it's all finished. So now I can go to my card front, and I can very carefully, and I am going to be brave and glue, but I'm going to have to be very careful not to smudge it, because if you get glue on window sheet, you do have a bit of an issue. It is fixable most of the time, and I'm going to share with you at the end how to fix up little errors with glue and cleaning up the window sheet. But for now, we'll just concentrate on trying to get it on with as little mess as possible. Okay, I'm just going to turn it over and make sure it's lined up. Yes, it is. Okay. Now, we've got that. And you'll remember that one of the other things I said we needed was a piece of just basic white cardstock that was the width of the card, 10.5 centimetres, and slightly under 4.5. And that is because I'm going to put that on the back in there, again, to cover up the mess of the glue and to just give the card a little bit more strength. So I'm going to do that. Again, I don't want ooze, so that will pop in there. And again, the reason I did it just slightly under 4.5 centimetres was to reduce the chances of it showing through on either the top or the bottom. Okay, now you'll also remember that we had another piece of paper where I had stamped and already coloured up this rose, and I said that what I do in the other piece was cut out a matching die cut for that shape there. So I've already done that. This rose, it started out exactly like that one. So it started with a layer of light Daffodil Delight, and then I added in some touches of light Calypso Coral and dark Daffodil Delight, and the centre is pumpkin pie with a touch of grey. Of I think smoky slate I used. So you can see it, you can bring out whatever colour you like, really. It doesn't matter too much. So what we'll do next is we will dimensional on, whoops, I need some new dimensionals. We'll dimensional on the rose. And, regular watchers will know that I'm going to use a lot of dimensionals, because that's just me. I don't want my rose to sag in the middle. So we're going to have several dimensionals where others might only use 1 or 2. Okay, and then we're just going to work out exactly where it matches. We're going to do that. And then we're going to get these two little granny apple green bits and add them in. Now the reason they're granny apple green is because I've coloured the leaves in granny apple green. And I have coloured in those little things. I use dark Calypso coral for that. But, you know, obviously you can use any colour combination you want. Okay, so we'll just, oops, get a little bit of glue. And we will just pop him under there and give him a... I like die sets where you've just got, in addition to the stamps, you've got these lovely little die cuts which just give you a little bit more to play with. And this little leaf is a great favourite of mine. If you look through my blog or my Pinterest page, you'll find lots and lots of things made using this set. Okay, now what is this shape for, you ask? Well, it's to do with tidying up the back. You can see I've added in my little plain piece of card, and what I'm now going to do is I'm just going to glue that on just to tidy it up a little bit. And because it's a reverse, you have to remember to put the glue on, you know, the good side of the die cut. Okay. And again, you know, if you're not unhappy with the look of that, then you don't need to do this step, but I just kind of like to tidy it up. And when you do that, it's always a good idea to, before you give everything a good press, just flick over and have a look. Can you see it from the front? And the answer is you can a little bit, so it's not in the right place, so a little bit of wiggle room. And yep, happy with that now. And so the only other thing that remains to be done is to pop in the insert. We'll just do that now. Now with a card like this with a clear front, you do have to be a little bit careful about where you write in it. It depends whether you want the writing to be on show. So if you're going to write in this card, either write down the bottom, or of course by adding in this little protective sheeting on the back, hiding all the glue, you've also got a nice little space to write here, and there's no reason why you couldn't have stamped a couple of things on there to make the back look even nicer as well if you wanted to. That's something I've done sometimes in the past when I have made transparent window sheet cards, just because you know, it's always nice to have plenty of room to write on. And then final embellishment, I'm going to add in some of these beautiful iridescent rhinestones, which are my current favourite embellishment because they're beautiful all by themselves, but I like the way they take on the colouring around them. Okay, so there it is. That is my partial die cut transparent window sheet floating card. I'm not quite sure what to call it. I think I'll call it the partial die cut floating flower card. As you see, a few steps to go through, but no step by itself is difficult, and it's, I think, worth the effort for a very special occasion. And if you have a bit of an accident with the window sheet and you get to the end of it and you discover that you've got a bit of a smear of glue or a bunch of unsightly fingerprints, well, the thing that I do is I get hold of some eucalyptus oil or some tea tree oil, which I just buy in the pharmacy aisle of my supermarket. It's really good for getting the glue off your scissors and whatever. And I just dip a little cotton bud in it, and I just give myself a little wipe with it. It is quite, it evaporates pretty well. If necessary, I just give it a little wipe with a cloth, and voila, the mark disappears. Now, as always, I'm happy to answer questions if you have any, and I can be reached through the contacts in the video in the description below, or through the end cards, which are going to pop up below for my Facebook page and my blog. If you liked what you've seen and you haven't already subscribed, please feel free to subscribe so you don't miss anything new. And if you live in New Zealand, don't forget that if you've seen anything you liked, you are more than welcome to shop with me, and there is a link to my online store below as well. And above all else, happy stamping, everyone.